I never expected to hear my own family rehearsing my public humiliation at our company's annual meeting, but that's exactly what happened 3 days before the biggest presentation of my career. I stood outside my father's home office, frozen behind a cracked door, listening to my mother laugh as she described how they would expose my failures in front of the entire board, our investors, and the local business press. They wanted me dressed in my old college hoodie, pushing a cart of broken computers while they listed all the ways I'd disappointed the family legacy. My father called it accountability. My siblings called it overdue. So when my phone rang that morning with my father screaming, breathless, demanding to know where I was, I simply said, "Dad, quick question. Did you enjoy discovering who actually owns 42% of the company?" Because I hadn't shown up to be their scapegoat. I had shown them the truth instead. If it were you, would you let your own family destroy your reputation publicly? Where are you listening from? At what time? Tell me. Because right now, I want to know I'm not the only one who's ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect. When people hear about the Sullivan family business in Austin, Texas, they picture generational wealth, corner offices with city views, and the kind of success story that gets featured in Harvard Business Review case studies. And honestly, that's exactly the image my family has carefully constructed for 3 decades. Sullivan & Associates isn't just any consulting firm. We're the company other businesses point to as the gold standard for corporate strategy, digital transformation, and family enterprise management. At least, that's the brand my parents have spent their entire lives building, polishing, and protecting like a sacred relic. My father, Robert Sullivan, founded the company in 1994, with nothing but a single client, a borrowed laptop, and what he calls pure determination. He loves telling that story at every networking event, every charity gala, every family dinner, and definitely every job interview he's ever conducted. The self-made narrative, the bootstrap mythology, the sacrifices and 18-hour workdays. He's polished that origin story until it shines like a championship trophy, rehearsed it until every pause feels natural, every detail perfectly timed for maximum impact. What he conveniently omits is that his father-in-law fronted him the first year's office rent, that my mother's trust fund covered payroll for the first 18 months, and that their country club connections provided the first 5 major contracts. But accuracy isn't the point when you're building a brand. Image is everything. My mother, Victoria, serves as the company's chief operating officer and the chief architect of our family's public persona. She's the type of woman who schedules magazine interviews 6 months in advance, coordinates our family's wardrobes for business events like military operations, and knows exactly which reporter should sit at which table during our annual investor dinner to generate the most favorable press coverage. Growing up, I watched her rehearsing speeches in the mirror for hours, adjusting lighting for impromptu photo shoots, and perfecting her smile before answering phone calls from journalists. She treats every interaction like a performance, every conversation like a potential PR opportunity. "Perception is reality," she'd say while fixing my hair before school pictures. "Success is 90% presentation and 10% substance." And for years, our family embodied that philosophy perfectly. We were the poster children for successful family business management, the example other dynasties tried to emulate. My older sister, Catherine, 34, became exactly what my parents designed, a Harvard MBA who married another Harvard MBA and now runs our company's international expansion division like a military campaign. She speaks 3 languages fluently, wears designer suits like armor, and generates new revenue streams the way normal people generate grocery lists. Catherine inherited my mother's strategic mind and my father's ruthless focus, but amplified both to an almost frightening degree. When Catherine walks into a room, investors open their checkbooks before she even starts talking. She's closed deals in Tokyo, London, and São Paulo, always wearing the same confident smile, always delivering results that exceed projections. My parents worship her success with an intensity that borders on religious devotion. Then there's my younger brother, Michael, 28, our company's director of strategic partnerships, and the family's designated charmer. He's the one who closes deals on golf courses, secures contracts at cocktail parties, and somehow makes corporate negotiations feel like friendly conversations between old friends. Michael inherited my father's natural salesmanship and my mother's political instincts, but wrapped them in an easy charm that makes clients feel like they're doing business with their favorite nephew. He's been groomed since childhood to be the face of our next generation, the heir apparent who'll carry the Sullivan legacy into the future. Clients love him, competitors respect him, and industry publications regularly feature him in their Rising Stars Under 30 articles. Both Catherine and Michael fit perfectly into the Sullivan legacy like custom-tailored suits. Sharp minds, strategic thinking, polished professionalism, and the kind of natural charisma that photographs beautifully for annual reports. They understand that business is theater, that success is performance, that every handshake is an audition for the next opportunity. Meanwhile, I, Alexandra, 31, have always been the glitch in their perfectly programmed algorithm. I joined the company straight out of college with a degree in computer science and what my parents diplomatically called technical aptitude. They saw my programming skills as useful but secondary, something that could support the real work of consulting and strategy development. I was supposed to handle IT infrastructure, manage our client databases, maybe develop some proprietary software to give us a competitive edge in the marketplace. Digital support for the family business. Important, but not strategic. Necessary, but not glamorous. But I saw something completely different when I looked at our operations. I saw inefficiencies everywhere. In our client management systems, our data analysis protocols, our entire approach to delivering measurable results. While my siblings networked at industry conferences and posed for magazine covers, I spent nights and weekends building better solutions, creating systems that could do in minutes what our consultants were taking weeks to accomplish manually. I developed algorithms that could predict market trends 3 quarters in advance with 87% accuracy. I created client assessment tools that increased our success rate by 40% and reduced project timelines by half. I built automated platforms that could analyze competitor strategies, identify market opportunities, and generate strategic recommendations faster and more accurately than teams of traditional consultants. I designed predictive models that helped our clients avoid costly mistakes and capitalize on opportunities they never would have seen coming. The problem was, my innovations didn't photograph well for Forbes covers. They didn't generate the kind of dramatic presentations that impressed investors or looked impressive in client pitches. They didn't create opportunities for my parents to give inspiring speeches about leadership and vision. My contributions were invisible, technical, behind-the-scenes magic that made everyone else look brilliant while keeping me hidden in the digital basement. And in a family obsessed with visible success, invisible contributions might as well not exist at all. My parents tolerated my work because it made the company more profitable, more efficient, more competitive. But they never understood it, never valued it properly, and definitely never credited it publicly. At family business meetings, they'd introduce Catherine as our international expansion expert who's opened markets across 3 continents, and Michael as our partnership development leader who's secured relationships with Fortune 500 companies. I was always Alexandra, who handles our technical infrastructure. Like I was the IT person who fixed the printers, rather than the strategic architect who'd revolutionized our entire approach to data-driven consulting. The irony was suffocating. My innovations were generating 60% of our competitive advantage, but I received maybe 6% of the recognition. The first major wake-up call came 2 years ago during our expansion into the Dallas market. We'd spent months preparing a comprehensive proposal for Henderson Global, a massive client that could single-handedly establish our dominance in North Texas. Catherine had developed the strategic framework, Michael had cultivated the relationships, and my parents had crafted the perfect presentation to showcase our capabilities. But 3 days before the final pitch, Henderson's CEO called with devastating news. They were requiring all potential consulting partners to demonstrate real-time data integration capabilities that could interface with their existing systems. Traditional consulting approaches weren't enough anymore. They needed partners who could deliver immediate, measurable, technologically advanced solutions. My family panicked. Catherine's strategic brilliance meant nothing if we couldn't deliver the technical integration Henderson demanded. Michael's relationship building was useless if we couldn't meet their operational requirements. My parents' presentation skills were irrelevant if we couldn't prove technological capability. That's when they reluctantly turned to me. I spent the next 72 hours in what I can only describe as a caffeine-fueled coding marathon, building a custom platform that could seamlessly integrate with Henderson's existing systems while providing real-time analytics, predictive modeling, and automated reporting capabilities. I didn't sleep, barely ate, and definitely didn't shower, but I delivered exactly what Henderson needed. The platform worked flawlessly. Henderson's team was stunned by capabilities they hadn't even known were possible. They signed our largest contract in company history on the spot, a 3-year deal worth more than our previous 5 biggest clients combined. But when the Austin Business Journal interviewed my family about the Henderson success, guess how the story played out? My father took credit for visionary leadership that anticipated market demand for integrated solutions. My mother praised Catherine and Michael for maintaining strategic focus under pressure while developing innovative client relationships. My name appeared exactly once in the final paragraph, described as technical support staff who assisted with implementation. Technical support staff. Like I was an intern who'd helped set up the PowerPoint slides. That article ran on a Friday. By Monday morning, 3 competitors had called trying to hire me away from my own family's company. By Wednesday, 2 venture capitalists had reached out about funding independent projects. By the end of the week, I realized that everyone in our industry knew exactly what I was worth, except my own family. But here's what they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to investigate or even ask about. 6 years earlier, when the company faced its most serious existential crisis, I hadn't just provided technical support. I had quite literally saved Sullivan and Associates from bankruptcy. The crisis started in 2018, when our 3 largest clients simultaneously terminated their contracts due to what they diplomatically called evolving strategic priorities. Translation: our competitors had offered better services at lower prices, and we'd gotten complacent. Within 30 days, we went from profitable to desperate, from industry leaders to struggling survivors. My parents were devastated. Catherine was still finishing her MBA. Michael was just starting his career. The company my father had built from nothing was about to disappear, taking with it not just our livelihood but our entire family identity. Traditional bank loans weren't an option. Our cash flow projections looked too unstable. Private investors wanted equity stakes my parents couldn't stomach surrendering. Family loans from my grandparents would have been humiliating and insufficient. So I made a decision that changed everything, though nobody understood its implications at the time. Using money I'd accumulated through freelance programming contracts, cryptocurrency investments, and a software patent I'd developed independently, I offered to provide the emergency capital Sullivan and Associates needed to survive, not as a gift, not as a family favor, but as a formal business investment. I purchased a 42% equity stake in the company for $1. $2 million in cash. Money I'd earned completely independently through work my family had dismissed as computer hobby projects. The investment was structured through my attorney as a standard minority shareholder agreement, with all the legal protections and governance rights that typically accompany significant equity positions. My parents were so desperate, so grateful, so focused on survival, that they signed the contracts without much scrutiny. Their lawyer explained that the minority shareholder provisions were standard formalities that protected everyone's interests. They assumed I'd always remain a silent partner, grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the family legacy while letting the real leaders make the real decisions. They never imagined I might someday need to use those legal protections to defend myself against their own betrayal. The capital injection worked. We restructured our operations, improved our service offerings, and slowly rebuilt our client base. Within 18 months, Sullivan and Associates was not only stable, but thriving. My technical innovations, combined with Catherine's strategic thinking and Michael's relationship skills, created a competitive advantage that made us nearly unstoppable in the marketplace. But success bred complacency, and complacency bred something much worse: entitlement. As the company grew stronger and more profitable, my family seemed to forget where the rescue funding had come from. They remembered that I'd helped during the crisis, but they remembered it as family loyalty rather than business investment. They treated my equity stake like a generous gift I'd given them rather than a serious financial commitment I'd made in their company. And gradually, insidiously, they began treating me like the family member who'd been lucky enough to get carried along by their success. rather than the investor who'd made their recovery possible. This dynamic reached its breaking point 6 months ago, when our biggest potential client ever, Morrison Industries, nearly terminated negotiations because they needed consulting services that could integrate with artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities we didn't officially offer. While Catherine scrambled to develop strategic workarounds and Michael tried to negotiate extended timelines, I spent 3 weeks building an AI-powered analytics platform that could do everything Morrison needed and more. The platform could predict market trends, analyze competitor behavior, optimize resource allocation, and generate strategic recommendations with accuracy levels that left Morrison's executives speechless. Morrison's CEO called it the most sophisticated consulting tool he'd ever encountered. Industry publications wanted exclusive features about our AI capabilities. Competitors started trying to reverse engineer our technology just to understand how we were delivering such unprecedented results. But when Forbes interviewed my family about our breakthrough into AI-powered consulting, the story focused entirely on my parents' innovative leadership vision and Catherine's strategic foresight in anticipating market demand for advanced analytics. Michael received praise for identifying and cultivating client relationships that pushed the company toward technological advancement. My role in developing the actual technology that made everything possible? Implementation support provided by technical staff. Not even technical team lead or senior developer. Staff. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. I wasn't just undervalued in my family's business. I was being systematically erased from it. My contributions were being harvested like crops, while my identity as their creator was being carefully edited out of every story. And that's when I decided it was time to remind everyone exactly who owned 42% of the company they were taking credit for building. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Our annual investor meeting was scheduled for November 15th, the biggest, most important presentation in company history. This wasn't just a routine update for existing stakeholders. We were courting 3 major venture capital firms interested in funding our expansion into international markets. Local business media would be covering the event. Industry analysts would be evaluating our growth potential. This was our debut on the biggest stage we'd ever accessed. Our chance to establish Sullivan and Associates as a major player in the global consulting marketplace. My parents had been planning for months, treating it like a royal coronation. They'd hired professional event coordinators, commissioned custom marketing materials, and even brought in a documentary crew to film a promotional piece about family business success in the modern economy. 3 days before the meeting, I stopped by my parents' house to review some technical presentations that needed final approval. Nothing dramatic, just routine slides about our AI capabilities and data integration services. I needed my father's sign-off on a few technical details before the presentation could be finalized. When I arrived at their house, a sprawling traditional in Austin's exclusive Westlake neighborhood, I could hear animated voices coming from my father's home office. Through the half-open door, I could see my parents, Catherine and Michael, gathered around the conference table, documents spread everywhere, laptops open. The kind of intense planning session that usually meant something important was being decided. I knocked gently on the doorframe, but nobody responded. The conversation was too focused, too energetic. So I waited in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt what was obviously important business planning. That's when I heard Catherine say something that made my blood freeze in my veins. We need to address the Alexandra situation once and for all. The Alexandra situation. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than a family member to be respected. My father's voice followed, weary but determined. You're absolutely right. It's gotten completely out of hand. She actually thinks those programming projects make her some kind of strategic partner. Programming projects? Not the AI platform that secured our biggest client. Not the innovations that generate 60% of our competitive advantage. Projects. Like I'd been building model airplanes in my spare time. My mother chimed in, her voice sharp with frustration that had apparently been building for months. The Morrison presentation gave her serious delusions of grandeur. She's been acting like she single-handedly saved the company, when all she did was follow the strategic direction Catherine developed. The Morrison AI platform had been entirely my creation, built from scratch based on direct client requirements that Catherine had initially dismissed as technically impossible. But then Catherine herself spoke up, And what she said next made me feel like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. Which is exactly why the annual meeting is perfect timing for this intervention. We do it publicly, professionally, but definitively. We announce a comprehensive restructuring that moves Alexandra to a strictly technical support role with no client interaction, no strategic input, and no decision-making authority. Technical support role. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Michael jumped in, excited by the plan. We position it as bringing in senior leadership to handle strategic growth while leveraging technical expertise more efficiently. Make it sound like a promotion for the family while quietly demoting Alex to where she actually belongs. Where she actually belongs. My own brother discussing my professional worth like I was furniture being rearranged. The media will absolutely love this story, my mother added, her voice brightening with the prospect of positive press coverage. Successful family business evolves, next generation steps up to meet market demands, responsible leadership transitions that prioritize client service over internal politics, will look forward-thinking and professionally mature. My father's chair creaked as he leaned back, satisfaction evident in his tone. And Alexandra won't be able to argue or make a scene. What's she going to do? Storm out of her own family's company in front of venture capitalists and reporters? She'll have to smile gracefully and accept the new structure like a professional. Plus, Catherine continued, and I could hear the cold calculation in her voice, it sends exactly the right message to investors. Technical skills are useful support functions, but real leadership requires vision, relationships, and strategic thinking. Qualities Alexandra simply doesn't possess. Vision, relationships, strategic thinking. Everything I'd been demonstrating for years while they took credit for the results. But Michael said something next that made my hands start shaking with rage. The best part is, after this restructuring, we can start discussing succession planning seriously. With Alex properly positioned as support staff, the leadership path becomes crystal clear for investors. Catherine runs operations and strategy, I handle partnerships and client relations, and eventually we take over completely when Dad retires. Exactly. My father agreed enthusiastically. Catherine leads the strategic vision, Michael manages the relationship ecosystem, and the company transitions smoothly to the next generation. Clean, logical, proper succession planning that investors can understand and support. But what about Alexandra's financial stake? My mother asked, and I could hear papers rustling as she looked through documents. She still owns that investment position from the crisis years. My father's laugh was dismissive, almost cruel. Minority shareholder with no operational authority. Those shares entitle her to dividend payments, not decision-making power. After the restructuring, she'll be an employee like anyone else, just one who happens to receive quarterly profit distributions. An employee. They were planning to transform me from a 42% owner into a technical support employee who happened to get dividend checks. And honestly, Catherine added, once she's properly positioned, we can start exploring options for buying out her shares at a reasonable valuation. Family harmony is more important than accommodating her unrealistic expectations about her role in the company. Buying out my shares, at a valuation they would determine. For the company I'd literally saved from bankruptcy. The conversation continued, but I stopped processing the specific words. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was afraid they might hear it through the wall. Everything I'd built, everything I'd contributed, everything I'd invested. They saw it all as obstacles to their vision of proper family hierarchy. They weren't planning a business meeting. They were planning a public execution, professionally designed to strip away my identity, my authority, and eventually my ownership stake in the company I'd helped save. And they expected me to stand there smiling while they destroyed everything I'd worked for, just because we shared the same last name. I backed away from the door in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd overheard. When I reached the front door, I realized I was still carrying the technical presentations I'd come to review. Presentations for a meeting where I would apparently be announced as a technical support employee rather than the person who'd created most of the technology being presented. I sat in my car in their driveway for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. My family, the people who'd raised me, worked alongside me, benefited from my innovations and investments, had just planned my professional destruction with the casual efficiency of a board meeting. But as the shock began to fade, it was replaced by something much more powerful: clarity. For years, I'd been operating under the assumption that family meant loyalty, that blood relationships guaranteed mutual respect, that my contributions would eventually be recognized and valued properly. I'd been patient, understanding, willing to work behind the scenes because I believed we were all building something together. But they'd just proven that I was alone in that belief. That evening, I called Jessica Martinez, my business attorney, and one of the few people who knew the complete details of my equity position in Sullivan and Associates. Jessica had handled the original investment paperwork 6 years earlier, and she'd been quietly managing various legal aspects of my stake ever since. "Jessica," I said, my voice still shaking slightly, "I need to understand exactly what rights I have as a minority shareholder. All of them. Every clause, every provision, every piece of legal authority that comes with my equity position." "Alexandra," she replied, immediately picking up on the tension in my voice. "What's happening? You sound like you're preparing for war." "Not war," I said quietly. "Defense." 3 hours later, I sat in Jessica's downtown office while she spread documents across her conference table like a legal battle plan. My investment contract, the company bylaws, state corporate law statutes, shareholder rights provisions, governance procedures, everything that defined the actual power structure of Sullivan and Associates, rather than the family hierarchy my parents assumed was controlling. "Alexandra," Jessica said, looking up from the papers with something approaching amazement in her voice, "did you know your equity agreement includes extraordinarily comprehensive minority shareholder protections?" I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean your father's attorney built in safeguards that I've honestly never seen in a family business investment. These provisions are typically reserved for major institutional investors or hostile takeover protection." She pointed to a section buried in the middle of page 14 of the original contract. "Any shareholder with 40% or more equity has veto power over major structural changes, personnel decisions affecting senior management positions, and public representations of company leadership." My mouth fell open. Veto power? Much more than that. She flipped to another section, highlighting specific clauses with a yellow marker. "Any changes to executive roles, public positioning of family members, succession planning, or operational structure require unanimous consent from all shareholders holding more than 35% equity." I stared at the contract like it was written in a foreign language I was just beginning to understand. So they literally can't restructure my position without my explicit approval. They can't restructure anything significant without your approval. And Alexandra, she paused, pointing to another clause I'd never noticed. "If they attempt to make material changes to company structure, leadership representation, or operational authority without following proper shareholder consent procedures, you have legal grounds to call for immediate board review, demand external audits, and potentially force dissolution proceedings." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Dissolution? You could legally force a complete company restructuring, leadership review, or even sale of assets. Your investment position gives you nuclear option authority over the entire business." I sat back in the chair, stunned. For 6 years, I'd been sitting on enough legal power to protect myself from exactly the kind of professional assassination my family was planning, and I'd never realized it. "Why would my father's attorney include provisions this comprehensive?" I asked. Jessica smiled grimly. "Because he was protecting the company against exactly this scenario. Family businesses fail most often due to internal power struggles and succession disputes. These clauses were designed to ensure that major investors couldn't be marginalized or pushed out arbitrarily. But I'm family, not a major investor. Alexandra," she said gently, "you are both. And legally, your investor rights supersede your family relationships." That evening, while my family continued planning my professional funeral, I spent hours with Jessica developing what she called Project Disclosure. Not revenge. We both agreed that vindictive responses would damage my long-term interests. This was about strategic defense, legal protection, and forcing an honest conversation about my actual role in the company. The plan was elegant in its directness. During tomorrow's annual meeting, immediately after they announced their restructuring plan, I would present my own announcement. A comprehensive review of my contributions to company growth, my legal position as a major shareholder, and my intentions to ensure Sullivan and Associates maintained proper governance standards moving forward. "They're planning to humiliate you publicly," Jessica said as we finalized the presentation materials. "So you respond publicly. Not with anger, not with personal attacks, but with facts and legal documentation they can't dispute or dismiss. What if they try to shut me down or prevent me from speaking?" She smiled. "As a 42% shareholder, you have guaranteed speaking rights at any company meeting. They legally cannot silence you." I spent that entire night preparing, rehearsing, and mentally steeling myself for what would either be the most important stand I'd ever taken or the most catastrophic family confrontation in Sullivan history. Probably both. November 15th arrived with the kind of crisp Austin weather that makes everything seem possible. The temperature perfect for outdoor photos, and the sky the exact shade of blue that photographers love for corporate events. The Four Seasons ballroom had been transformed into something resembling a corporate theater. Round tables for investors and clients, a raised platform for presentations, professional lighting rigs, and cameras positioned strategically to capture every moment for the promotional documentary my mother had commissioned. I arrived exactly 30 minutes early, wearing my most expensive suit, and carrying a leather portfolio that looked identical to the ones Catherine and Michael were carrying. To any outside observer, I appeared to be just another member of the Sullivan family leadership team, prepared to deliver another successful annual presentation. My family greeted me with the kind of warm professionalism they'd perfected for public events. Handshakes that looked confident for the cameras, smiles that photographed beautifully, careful positioning that created the appearance of unified family leadership that investors expect from successful family businesses. "Alexandra," my father said, his voice loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "So glad you could make it. This is going to be a big day for all of us." I smiled back genuinely. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Dad. I've been looking forward to this for months." He had no idea how true that statement actually was. The presentation began flawlessly, like a perfectly choreographed performance. My father delivered opening remarks about company growth and strategic vision that had the investors nodding approvingly. Catherine presented international expansion numbers that genuinely impressed the entire room. Her work in developing European markets had been exceptional by any measure. Michael charmed everyone with partnership success stories that generated actual applause from the audience. Then came the technical showcase segment, where I presented our AI-powered analytics platform and data integration capabilities. The demonstration went perfectly. Clients loved seeing real-time predictive modeling. Investors were fascinated by the competitive advantages our technology provided, and reporters took extensive notes about our innovation pipeline. For a moment, watching the positive reaction to technology I'd developed, I almost felt proud to be part of the family business. Almost felt like we really were building something together. But then my father returned to the podium for what he announced as exciting news about organizational improvements. "Now," he said, clicking to a slide titled Leadership Evolution, "I'd like to discuss some important structural enhancements that will position Sullivan and Associates for our next phase of explosive growth." The slide appeared on screen, showing a new organizational chart that looked like corporate hierarchy perfection. Clean lines, clear authority structures, and obvious succession planning that investors could easily understand. My father began describing exactly what I'd overheard 3 days earlier, but wrapped in language that made it sound like strategic brilliance rather than family politics. Technical operations would be streamlined under senior leadership oversight to maximize efficiency. Strategic decision-making would be consolidated with experienced executives to ensure consistent client service. Innovation development would be properly integrated with business development to optimize market impact. Every euphemism translated to the same thing. I was being demoted from strategic partner to technical support staff. I watched my family's faces as he spoke. Catherine looked satisfied, like a chess player who'd just achieved checkmate. Michael appeared relieved, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. My mother was practically glowing with pride at how smoothly their plan was unfolding. The investors were listening attentively, appreciating what sounded like mature business leadership making tough decisions for long-term success. The reporters were taking notes about family business evolution and professional management practices. Everything was proceeding exactly as they'd rehearsed. When my father finished, He looked directly at me with that practiced smile, his eyes conveying the subtle threat behind his words. "Alexandra, would you like to say a few words about these organizational improvements?" This was my scripted cue to gracefully accept the demotion, to thank the family for their guidance, to position myself as grateful for the opportunity to contribute in a more focused capacity while they handled the complex strategic decisions. Instead, I stood up and walked to the microphone. "Thank you, Dad. I actually do have several important things to share with everyone here today." I clicked to my first slide, which showed a simple title: Sullivan and Associates, a complete picture. 6 years ago, when this company faced the most serious financial crisis in its history, Sullivan and Associates received an emergency capital investment that prevented bankruptcy and enabled every success we're celebrating today. A slight murmur went through the room. This definitely wasn't part of the program they'd expected. That investment came from Alexandra Sullivan, and it represented a 42% equity stake in the company. The murmur grew louder. My father's face had gone completely white. My mother's hand flew to her throat like she was choking. Catherine and Michael looked like they'd been slapped. I clicked to the next slide, displaying the legal documentation of my shareholding position in clear, undeniable detail. Under the terms of that investment agreement, which was reviewed and approved by independent legal counsel, any major structural changes to company leadership, operational authority, or public representation require unanimous consent from all shareholders holding more than 35% equity. The room had become completely silent. Reporters were writing frantically. Investors were leaning forward in their chairs, suddenly paying much closer attention to family dynamics they'd assumed were simple. The restructuring announcement that was just presented was developed and approved without proper shareholder consultation, and therefore cannot be legally implemented under our current corporate governance standards. I paused, making eye contact with each family member before continuing. Furthermore, as this company's largest single shareholder and the principal architect of the technical innovations that secured our Morrison Industries contract, developed our AI analytics platform, and generated 63% of our current revenue growth, I believe our investors and clients deserve a more complete and accurate picture of company leadership and contribution. My father tried to interrupt. "Alexandra, this isn't the appropriate time or place for—" "Actually, Dad," I said calmly, "according to our corporate bylaws and shareholder agreements, annual meetings are exactly when major governance issues should be addressed. All significant announcements require full shareholder approval, which means this is precisely when these details need to be discussed." I clicked to my next slide, showing revenue growth charts directly correlated to the technical innovations my family had been dismissing as programming projects. Over the past 3 years, technology platforms I developed independently have increased client retention by 47%, reduced project delivery times by 35%, and enabled service offerings that generated $2.8 million in new revenue. These innovations were created outside normal work hours, using my personal equipment, and funded through my individual investment in the company's growth. Another click brought up a timeline showing every major client success correlated with technology implementations I'd created. The Henderson Global contract was secured using predictive analytics I developed. The Morrison Industries partnership exists because of an AI platform I built from scratch. Our expansion into international markets has been successful because of translation and cultural analysis tools I created specifically for Catherine's initiatives. Catherine was staring at the presentation like she was seeing her own work history rewritten in real time. "Moving forward," I continued, "I look forward to continuing collaborative family leadership with proper recognition for all contributors, accurate attribution of achievements, and strict adherence to established governance procedures that protect every shareholder's interests." I closed the laptop and looked out at the room full of stunned faces. "Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions about company structure, shareholder rights, or the technology platforms that drive our competitive advantages." The silence lasted exactly 6 seconds. Then every reporter in the room raised their hand at once. For the next hour and 15 minutes, I answered detailed questions about my equity position, my technical contributions, and the governance structure my parents had apparently forgotten existed when they planned my professional execution. Catherine tried to redirect the conversation twice. Michael attempted damage control once. My father looked like he was having a combination heart attack and panic attack. But the investors were absolutely fascinated. They'd just learned that the technical support staff they'd been told about was actually the company's largest shareholder and the creator of most innovations that made Sullivan and Associates competitive in the modern marketplace. Several venture capital representatives requested private meetings to discuss my technology platform specifically. 2 reporters asked for follow-up interviews about family business governance best practices. One investor openly wondered why the family had been underutilizing such valuable technical leadership capabilities. When the formal presentation finally ended, when the investors had networked their way out of the ballroom, when the reporters had packed up their equipment and headed back to write stories that would definitely not match the promotional narrative my parents had prepared, my family and I sat alone at our table in the empty ballroom. The silence stretched for nearly 5 minutes before my father finally spoke. "What the hell do you think you just did to us?" I looked at him calmly, feeling more centered than I had in years. I protected my investment and my dignity. "You humiliated your entire family," my mother hissed, her carefully applied makeup slightly smeared from stress-induced perspiration. "No," I replied quietly. "You planned to humiliate me. I simply refused to participate in my own destruction." Catherine was still staring at the shareholder documents Jessica had included in my presentation materials. "How long have you known about these governance clauses?" "I learned about them 3 days ago," I said honestly. "Right around the time I learned about your restructuring plan." Michael looked genuinely confused, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. You heard us planning?" "Every single word. The Alexandra situation, the technical support role, the succession planning that excluded me entirely, the media strategy to make my demotion look like family business evolution." The silence returned, heavier this time, weighted with the realization that their private strategy session had been anything but private. "So what happens now?" my father asked, his voice smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. I stood up, straightening my suit jacket and picking up my portfolio. "Now we run this company properly, with full shareholder consultation on major decisions, with accurate attribution of contributions, with respect for everyone's role in our success." I headed toward the exit, then paused at the ballroom doorway. "Oh, and Dad? Next time you want to restructure someone's career, you might want to make sure they don't own enough of the company to restructure everyone else's." I left them sitting there in the empty ballroom, processing the fact that the family member they'd planned to demote was actually the one person who could dissolve their entire business if they tried it again. 3 months after what family members still refer to as the November incident, Sullivan and Associates announced a comprehensive new leadership structure, one based on actual contributions rather than birth order, one that recognized technical innovation as equally valuable to client relationships and strategic planning, one that treated all family members as partners rather than subordinates in a traditional hierarchy. Catherine still runs international operations, and she's incredibly good at it. Michael still handles partnerships and client relations, where his natural charm creates genuine value. But now I serve as Chief Technology Officer and Chief Innovation Officer, with full recognition for the systems and strategies that have driven our competitive success. My parents, they're adjusting, slowly, carefully, learning that shared power isn't diminished power, and that family businesses succeed when they value all family members' contributions equally rather than ranking them by traditional expectations. The investors loved our mature governance transition. The media coverage focused on innovative family business management and collaborative leadership models. Our clients appreciated finally meeting the person who'd been creating the technology that improved their results. And me? For the first time in my professional life, I'm exactly where I belong. Not in the shadows supporting someone else's vision while they take credit, but in full view, building the future of our company with my own hands and my own name attached to the results. But the most important change isn't organizational or financial or even professional. It's personal. I've learned that respect can't be earned through endless patience and silent contribution. Sometimes it has to be demanded through clear boundaries and undeniable evidence. I've learned that family loyalty should never require self-erasure, that love doesn't mean accepting diminishment, and that protecting your own worth isn't betrayal. It's survival. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Tell me. Because if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, If you've ever had your contributions minimized or your worth questioned, if you've ever felt invisible despite being essential, I want you to know something crucial. Sometimes the quiet person in the corner isn't powerless. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone exactly who they are and what they've built. And sometimes the best defense against family betrayal isn't fighting back with anger or emotion. It's simply standing up with facts they can't dispute and legal authority they can't ignore. Your worth isn't determined by whether your family recognizes it. Your value isn't diminished by their failure to see it clearly. Your contributions don't become less significant because someone else takes credit for them. But when they plan to publicly diminish you, when they scheme to erase your achievements, when they plot to reduce your identity to make themselves look better, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stand up and remind everyone, including them, exactly who you really are. If they want to play games with your career, with your reputation, with your future, make sure you understand the rules completely. Because you might just discover that you've been holding the winning hand all along, waiting for the right moment to play it. So to everyone listening, whether it's morning where you are, afternoon, or late at night when the world feels both too quiet and too loud at the same time, remember this: you deserve to be seen accurately. You deserve credit for your work. You deserve respect for your contributions. You deserve to take up space without apologizing for it. Don't let anyone, not even family, not even people who claim to love you, convince you that you're worth less than you are. Don't let them make you smaller to make themselves feel bigger. Don't let them erase you from the story you helped write. And if they try, well, sometimes the best response isn't explanation or negotiation or compromise. Sometimes it's simply standing up and saying, "Actually, let me tell you exactly who I am and what I own." Because the truth, delivered at the right moment with the right evidence, has power that no amount of family politics can overcome. And sometimes that truth is the only protection you need. Where you're listening from, whatever time it is, whatever struggles you're facing with recognition or respect or family dynamics that make you feel invisible, you have more power than you realize. You've contributed more than they acknowledge. You're worth more than they're willing to admit. Don't let them convince you otherwise. And when the moment comes to stand up for yourself, don't hesitate. The quiet ones often turn out to be the ones who've been building the foundations everyone else is standing on. And when you finally speak up, make sure they hear not just your voice, but the truth about everything you've been carrying while they weren't paying attention. Trust me on this one. Sometimes the family member they underestimate is the one who's been holding everything together from the beginning.